I was maybe around 13 or 14 years old at the time, and I was recently granted the privilege of staying home alone. Every now and then, when I was home alone, I'd hear sounds coming from upstairs, and so I would instinctively call my mum. She then told me a story of how she used to hear things in her old house all the time, and how it's just the house settling in. Fast forward to many instances of sounds later. I decided that the very next time I was going to be home alone, I was going to be completely silent and make as little noise as possible. Within the first half an hour, there was nothing. Not a peep out of the entire house. I eventually got bored and felt safe, so I went to grab the TV remote to watch some TV. But a few seconds before I grabbed the remote, I heard a huge crash upstairs and running footsteps. I was sure more than ever that someone was in fact in the house. By now, there were plenty of consistent sounds coming from upstairs, that it was a fact that someone was upstairs. 14-year-old me decided to hatch a quick plan. Being the skinny, most non-threatening little girl that I was, I first grabbed the kitchen knife. Then, I grabbed the shoe and propped open the front door. And after a few moments of some deep breaths, I yelled out in the deepest voice that I could. "I know you're upstairs. I'm giving you a chance to leave without me calling the police, but I have propped the front door open, and I'll be in the bathroom. Be aware that I'm holding a knife, and if you refuse to leave, I will call the police." Sure enough, I walk into the bathroom with my knife. I'm absolutely scared to death that someone will open the door. I wait and I wait, until the sound that to this day will always scare me for this reason. I heard the front door close and the shoe was moved. I quickly locked the door and turned on the alarm system. I don't know who that was, or what the hell their intentions were, but I hope I never see this person, or ever hear from this person again. This is something that happened to me 3 years ago, and still sticks with me, especially when I'm out at night. I was on my way back home from a late night session at the gym. The gym is right next to my campus, but my flat was on the complete opposite side of the city, so I was definitely making sure that I caught one of the last buses. Otherwise, it was a long walk back. I got to the bus stop and it was empty, except for this one older guy who looked pretty disheveled and out of it. Already, this was setting off alarm bells in my mind. So I stood far away from him and began to wait. The bus tracker said that the next bus wouldn't be here for another 15 minutes. Damn it. Oh well. I put my headphones in and started listening to one of my podcasts to pass the time, all the while making sure that I kept the man within my peripheral vision. And it should be noted at this point that I'm very short. I'm 4 feet 5 inches and about 95 pounds. And I'm used to unwanted attention. And it was against my better judgment that I was even out this late by myself in an unfamiliar part of town. I must have let my guard slip, because I suddenly felt a hand on my shoulder and the man was standing right next to me. Too close. I looked at him and he was saying something to me, so I took my headphones out to hear him.
You alright there, pal? I was saying I've never seen someone so short before.
He was swaying and grinning at me. I'm alright, thanks.
What bus are you getting?
I did not want to answer that, truthfully. But there were only 2 buses left to come that night. I said it was the other one, and he looked disappointed.
I've always wanted to meet someone like you.
He stood there and stared at me for what felt like a whole minute. I felt his eyes all over me. Now I understand what it means to feel like a piece of meat. Eventually, he said,
Do you have sex?
I've had some inappropriate questions from strangers before, but that took the biscuit. I should have said it was none of his business, but I find myself saying, yes, uncomfortably. He seemed to contemplate that for a while, amused by the idea.
What's it like down there? I've always wanted to know.
From his tone, he sounded excited. I took a couple of steps away from him. This time I was more prepared. That's not really your business. I was thinking about how long the walk would be back home. He was getting the bus I needed. I didn't know where the other bus was going. Was it worth it going through with my lie? I didn't know. I suspected that he would get on the same bus as me regardless. He took a step closer. This was the moment I actually got scared. He saw me step backwards and didn't care. He knew I was uncomfortable and didn't care.
I've always wanted to fuck a midget.
That was it. I wish I had said, get lost or leave me the fuck alone or something along those lines. But I was just too scared. I need to go, I blurted out and walked as briskly as I could without running. It would take him no effort at all to catch up to me. I pictured him walking behind me with his much longer legs, but I didn't want to look back. I walked for a couple of minutes before I finally glanced back. He was still at the bus stop, but he had moved about 10 feet to stand at the edge of it. I could only see his silhouette against the light of the bus stop, but I could tell that he was watching me. I walked a full hour and a half home, picturing him following me the whole way. It creeps me out to this day. One Thursday evening, I was playing Pokémon Go during an event, and like an idiot, I walked into a park by myself in the dark at around 9 PM. There were a few late night dog walkers and people around when I got there, so I thought it was fine. But by the time I got all the Pokemon in the area, everyone that was around had left, and I was all alone in the dark. So, it was about then when I was like, okay, I'm gonna get murdered out here. Time to leave. Boy, am I glad I did. As I get halfway towards the parking area of the park and the exit of the park, a suspicious car with tinted black windows drives past me full speed. He enters the car park, turns around at the dead end of the car park, and then drives back past me again. I was a little spooked because I'm very aware of how easy of a victim I am right now, and that maybe they were just lost. As I continue walking and catching Pokemon while I walk, the car drives past 3 more times. There is nothing down on this road except the car park, the park and myself, and it's dark. So, now I'm thoroughly spooked. The 4th and 5th time they drive past, they slow right down next to me and then zoom off again and rounded a corner. Realizing what was happening in a moment of sheer panic, I ran to a nearby parked car, dove underneath it and laid still. Lo and behold, the same car comes back around and slows down in the exact spot where I was seconds prior. Moments later, a door opens and a terrifying, sketchy looking man gets out. There could have been more than one person in that car, but I didn't see them. he walks around for a bit, seemingly looking for someone. There was a heart-stopping moment where he walks in the direction of the car that I was underneath and stops right next to me. If I had reached out, I could touch his boots. I could hear his heavy breathing. I was sure that he'd look down and find me under the car. I closed my eyes, held my breath, and was almost in tears. What felt like 30 minutes, but probably another minute or so, goes by, and suddenly, he seemed to have given up on whatever he was looking for, swears and gets back into his truck, but doesn't drive off, and the car sits there. And that's when I heard at least 2 male voices arguing and saying things like,
He was here.
Another couple of minutes passed by when I heard the tires screeching and driving off faster than before. I laid under that car for a while, terrified they'd come back. About another 10 minutes passed by when I finally gathered enough courage to get out underneath this car and then run back home along a well-lit road. Anyway, I've definitely learned not to wander around by myself at night anymore, and never to play Pokémon Go alone. I have no idea who that guy in the car was or what he wanted, but creepy car guy, I hope we never meet again. This story is told from the perspective of a female. My sophomore year of college, I matched with this guy on Tinder. He sent me a message, and I was just getting weird vibes. My parents raised me to be smart, so I saw red flags right away, and immediately took screenshots of our chat and his profile, and then unmatched with him. He was asking me if I would drive to this motel 15 miles away for a hookup, which was kind of a bizarre thing for anyone my age at that time to be requesting, especially in an urban area. His tag said that he was 3 miles away from my current location at the time, so it was weird that he wanted to meet somewhere further than both of our locations. So, now that I had unmatched him, I expected to continue in my merry old way. But day after day, I kept feeling this uneasiness about the whole thing, like, one of those gut feeling intuition things that told me something was wrong. A couple of weeks passed after unmatching with the guy, and I was just scrolling through Facebook, and I saw something that made my stomach drop. You know how Facebook automatically plays videos one after the other? I had been watching some cooking video, and the next thing that popped up was a video about a missing person, a photo of him, the guy that I had matched with on Tinder, the same photos that I had seen on Tinder. Anyway, I had screenshots and gave what I knew to his hometown PD. I didn't get a follow-up, but I was young and truly believed that I had done my part. The weird part in all of this was that I had matched with him after he went missing. It's been years, and I still think about it. I know there are many explanations for what happened, and believe me, I've gone through them. His belongings were found on the side of the road. There were items missing, but his phone wasn't listed as one of them. His remains were found a long time later at a lake quite a ways away from where his belongings were. The coroner's report said that he passed of natural causes. I don't know how to explain what happened. My best guess is that someone was using his photos for a fake Tinder account. Sometimes I worry though, if something else had happened to him. There's a part of me that wonders if maybe he was taken, and someone was using his profile from his phone to lure girls. But then again, I'm sure the cops must have had ways to ping his phone to find his location, if that were the case. And I'm probably just overthinking. One late afternoon Saturday, I decided I needed to go to the mall. It was a stressful week at work, so I thought some retail therapy would definitely help. It was late in the day, and by the time I got there, the mall was starting to get empty, and there were hardly any people around. I shopped for the typical lady stuff like makeup, lingerie, and cute outfits, and before I knew it, I'd spent plenty of time at the mall, and it was time to head home. I started walking out towards the exit of the mall, and I decided that I needed to use the restroom. The restrooms were close-ish to the exit of the mall, so I wasn't wasting any more time at the mall. The restrooms were at the end of a very large and wide corridor. I made my way through the corridor, no issues, and approached the ladies' bathroom. The sign on the door said it was still open, and so I entered the women's restrooms. They were your typical mall type with lots of stalls, and at first, it was honestly sketchy looking and dirty, and I just felt downright creeped out. It felt like a trap. The stalls near the entrance were dirty with water and toilet paper everywhere, so I made my way down to the end of the restrooms where it was a bit cleaner. Anyhow, I entered one of the stalls, sat down to, well, you know. And then I heard someone enter the restrooms after me. I didn't see anyone down the corridor on my way here, so it was a little weird, but hey, this is a public bathroom. Then, the person decided to use the stall next to mine. I could see from the gap on the floor between the wall of the stall and the floor, lots of movement from someone's shadow. I wasn't sure if they were getting changed or not, so I didn't pay much attention at first. But it felt like the shadow was coming from above at some points, and the person was clearly not using the toilet. I was really concerned with the amount of movement, but I tried my best to ignore it. After maybe the third time, I decided to look up, and to my absolute horror, I could see a man's face with the creepiest, most bone-chilling smile looking down at me, filming me with his phone. I instantly shouted out, "What the fuck, you pervert?" And in a moment of sheer shock and disbelief, this all very quickly turned to fear as I got up and leapt out of the stall and was greeted by an empty bathroom. Not one person was in sight, and the stalls were open and empty except the one next to mine. I ran for the restroom exit, but it was locked. Luckily, it had a twist lock that I could turn, and as I did, I heard a stall door open from behind me, but I didn't wait around to see him come out. As I was exiting the bathroom, I noticed the sign on the door had changed to "Closed for maintenance." This sign was definitely not there when I went in. I screamed some more, shouting to get anyone's attention as I ran down the corridor towards the exit. But the mall was empty at this point. I booked it out of the mall without stopping. I didn't tell this story to anyone until now, not even my parents. It was a chilling experience for me, and I hope no one else goes through that. In the summer before my senior year in college, my little brother, always interested in military stuff, had gotten a pair of night vision goggles for his birthday, and he'd left them at my apartment. One night, I was bored and decided to go try out the goggles at a wooded hiking area nature preserve nearby. In retrospect, this seems like a very stupid idea since I was all by myself and female, but I was young and stupid, and got myself all excited at the possibility of seeing deer and other woodland creatures in their natural nighttime habitat. I was familiar with these woods. My best friend and I had hiked there before at night, and we'd never run into anyone else. Our area is mostly rural and pretty safe, so I didn't anticipate any trouble. I parked in the little sparsely lit parking area, ignored the sign, "Park closes at 10", and entered the woods, night vision goggles in hand. It was a half moon that night, and that was the only light that filtered down through the canopy of trees. It was pretty dark, and I didn't want to put on the goggles until I'd found a place to sit down. So I lit my way with the mini mag light on my keychain. A couple of times I thought I heard a little rustling in the woods a fair distance away, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, and I put it down to animal activity, hopefully the deer that I'd come hoping to see. After I'd hiked in a fair distance, I found a fallen log to sit on and put on the goggles. I don't know if you've ever used night vision goggles before, but the effect is impressive. They can turn near pitch darkness into bright as day, and everything appears in shades of green, but quite bright and clear. For a while I had a blast looking around from my fallen log vantage point. Some chipmunks played around in the leaves nearby, and a big owl blinked its lamp-like eyes at me from a tree branch. No deer though, and I started to think that maybe they wouldn't be likely to come anywhere near me, darkness or no, if I sat right out in the open on a log. So I decided to find a place where I could be a little more hidden. I made my way a little deeper into the woods and finally found a huge tree, perfect for climbing. I've always loved climbing trees, so it was nothing for me to hoist myself up a few branches and settle in to wait for my deer. I didn't get to see any. What I did see though, lit up in bright night vision green after about 10 minutes of waiting, was this. A man, dressed head to toe in dark-colored clothing, making his way stealthily through the woods. He was coming from the same direction I'd come and was clearly trying to stay hidden, moving from tree to tree and glancing around carefully before moving on again. It looked very much like he was looking for someone. It took me a few moments to notice that he was carrying something, and when I saw what it was, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. He had a knife, a big one, and he was gripping it as if he expected to use it in the very near future. It wasn't deer hunting season, and this was a nature preserve, where hunting of any kind was prohibited. And at any rate, the guy was alone and not dressed like a hunter. There was no deer in sight, and very few hunters kill their prey with knives. I was suddenly horribly aware of my situation. A young woman alone, weaponless, in the middle of the woods at night. This was the 90s, so no cell phones, and even if I had had one, I wouldn't have felt safe using it lest I drew his attention. I didn't know how he was able to see so well in the dark. I guess his eyes had just adjusted, and I was terrified he would look up and see me. I sat there, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, and watched him as he continued his methodical and stealthy process of scanning the forest for who or whatever the hell he was stalking. I scanned around but couldn't see anyone else, even from my high vantage point, and the sickening thought struck me that he might be looking for me. I remembered the rustling noises that I'd heard in the woods when I first arrived, and then I thought back further and remembered something else. A white car that had followed too close behind me for most of my drive to the nature preserve. I'd been annoyed a little and freaked out at the time, but when I'd turned into the nature preserve parking area, the white car had passed me and driven on its own, and I hadn't thought anything more of it. Now I wondered, horrified, if this was the driver of that car. If he'd circled back and seen my parked car, alone in the lot. If he'd come in after me. I sat, paralyzed with fear, and watched the man for what felt like forever, but was probably another half an hour or so. There was a heart-stopping moment when he paused right underneath my tree, and I was sure that he was going to look up and find me, but he didn't. After a while, he seemed to give up on whatever plan he had in mind. I heard him say, "Fuck it," and he started heading back in the direction he'd come, the direction of the parking area. I stayed in the tree, wet with sweat and crying, until the sun came up a few hours later. Then I climbed down and, still terrified, gripping the little can of pepper spray on my keychain, I made my way as fast as I could to the parking lot. The man had been there. My windshield had been smashed with a rock, and someone had scraped all down the sides of the car with something sharp, presumably a giant knife that I'm lucky didn't end up in my chest. Thank God for the night vision goggles that let me see him before he could see me. And thank God for big trees with sturdy branches. I hope I never see him again.
The Red Room. Toshi's entire high school had been uneasy for the past month. The string of student suicides throughout the area had set everyone on edge. Though the police hadn't been able to rule in any sort of foul play, it was suspicious and utterly terrifying to say the least. People around campus had started saying that the suicides were directly linked to a cursed pop-up that would appear whenever anyone would look into the incidents online. Toshi had always been heavily skeptical of these sorts of things, and the rumors fascinated him. So that evening, he decided that he would try to find anything he could regarding this cursed pop-up. He sat at his computer for hours, searching for anything even remotely related. However, he couldn't find anything. It was just when he was about to give up and shut his computer down for the night when it happened. A small red pop-up jumped on his screen. Through the speakers, he heard a soft, childlike voice ask, "Anata wa suki desu ka?" Or the incomplete question, "Do you like?" This startled him, so he tried to exit out of it. However, it just reopened. He tried again, and it popped up once more. He began to get frustrated, so he started rapidly clicking the X button. That's when he noticed it. The text on the screen was changing. Each time he clicked to close the ad, the words would expand a tiny bit more, revealing something hidden in between. He continued clicking, slowly watching the full sentence unravel in front of him. He felt the room grow cold as the pop-up opened one last time, now completing the sentence. "Anata wa akai heya ga suki desu ka?" Do you like the red room? His screen was soon flooded bright red, and a list of names ran through it. To his horror, he recognized the names as the students who had committed suicide earlier that month. His eyes scanned quickly down the list, his pulse quickening all the while. Suddenly, he released a gasp as his eyes fell upon his best friend's name at the end of the list. Just then, Toshi's arms became covered in goosebumps. Frozen in place, he felt cold breath on the back of his neck.
This particular event happened almost a year ago, sometime in mid-October. A couple of friends and I drove out to visit an old friend of ours from high school, George, who now lived about an hour out of the city. We spent the whole day with him, and it was really late when we finally decided to start the drive back home. My friend Lisa was passed out in the passenger seat. She'd had a few drinks and decided to spend the ride home asleep. My other friend Sam was sitting in the back seat behind Lisa and was playing a game on her smartphone. I, of course, was driving. I was following the GPS's instructions back to the freeway. At that moment, we were driving down a dark street with thick trees bordering both sides. Everything was pretty peaceful, with the only sounds that I could hear being that of the car moving along the road and the radio on low volume. Suddenly, my car let out a loud jolt, and it felt as if I had hit something. Sam let out a shocked scream, while Lisa remained dead asleep. I slammed on the brakes and the car came to a halt. I was breathing heavily when I asked what the hell had just happened. Sam peered through the back window and gasped. She turned to me with an angry look on her face and shouted that I had just hit a dog. I looked through the back window and sure enough, a dog was laying in the road a few yards behind the car. Sam is a pretty big animal lover, so I wasn't surprised to see her get pissed at me. She was about to open her door and rush to the animal's aid when I stopped her. Once I had gone over the shock of running over a dog, I got a feeling in my gut that told me that something was off. I'm no braggart, but I consider myself a very attentive and safe driver. My eyes were on the road at all times, and I distinctly remember not seeing any dog in the road prior to the car jolting. Yes, it was dark, but I was sure that I would have at least seen the dog in the headlights before hitting it. I looked through the back window and took a closer look at the dog, or at least as much as I could make out in the reddish light coming from my tail lights. It was a fairly big dog, at least a golden retriever or something like that. One particular detail caught my attention. I could see the dog's tail wagging. Now, I'm no expert in the mannerisms of animals, but I was sure the last thing a dog would do after being hit by a car would be to wag its tail. After a moment of thought, I pressed my foot down on the accelerator and sped off. Sam snapped at me and ordered me to go back, but I told her that something was wrong with the whole situation. She continued to argue, but she fell silent as she turned back towards the back window. She asked, "What the heck?" with a shaken voice. I looked in the rearview mirror. Though it was dark, I was able to make out the silhouettes of 3 large figures emerging from the trees on the side of the road. The dog was now up on its feet and jumping around joyfully. The 3 figures looked in our direction as I pressed my foot down on the gas harder and sped off. Sam and I remained silent for the rest of the ride home. It wasn't until a few days later that we would tell Lisa about it. We've been back to visit George a few times since then, but we always make sure to leave before sunset. Still, I dread to think about what would have happened if we had gone out of the car.